Welcome to the program. You're with Arise News in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Ahead over the next 30 minutes, all the global headlines you need to know about. You're watching Arise News now with me, Folake Adesugba. And our top stories: Americans head to the polls in millions in crucial midterm elections that are being seen as a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency. Trump braces for possible Democratic reckoning as first polls close. We'll have our U.S. correspondent tell us what sense we are getting about the early polls results. Plus, more than 200 mass graves containing thousands of bodies have been found in areas of Iraq that were once controlled by the Islamic State. And an army search operation is underway in Cameroon to rescue dozens of people kidnapped from a boarding school. They are calling it the battle for the soul of America, and that's our top story. As voters go to the polls in the midterm elections that could have a crucial impact on how America is governed in the remaining 2 years of President Donald Trump's first term in office. Voting is ended in a number of key U.S. states in midterm elections that both parties have called the most important ballots in the nation's history. Counting is underway in a number of states, Kentucky and Indiana, and polls have just closed in an array of other constituencies. At stake, all 435 seats in the House of Representatives and 35 Senate positions. Democrats are confident of stealing control of the House from the Republicans, but could struggle to overturn a conservative majority in the Senate. All right, we're trying to get live with Laurie, who's been following the results coming in, and she joins us now from our London studios. Hello, Laurie, you there with us? All right, now counting is underway in Indiana and Kentucky. Have any trends emerged?
Look, it is still very early. In most constituencies in those two states, we're looking at 3 to 4% of the vote being counted. But the Republicans are chalking up some early leads in some key races. Let's look first at Indiana. Let's look at the race for Senate there. Joe Donnelly is the Democratic incumbent. Now, he was always a rather weak candidate in a very heavily leaning Trump state. In fact, his position was so weak as a Democrat that he took to telling voters that he was actually a supporter of Trump, that he supported Trump's stance on immigration, that he supported Trump's stance on tax cuts. He is not doing very well. The last count I saw, with 4% of the vote counted, we had Donnelly on 35%, his Republican challenger Mike Braun on 61%. That is a massive gap. And as counting progresses, Mike Braun is actually opening up that gap. When 1% of the vote was counted, he had only 55% of the vote. So with each bit of the vote that's counted, he seems to be extending his lead. Now, as I mentioned, Joe Donnelly is an unlikely Democrat in Trump country, but he is one of those seats that the Democrats must retain if they want to take the Senate. Now, polling suggested that it would be very unlikely for the Democrats to retake the Senate. They have to win 12 seats and defend all of the seats that they are contesting. So to lose one, they must defend all of the 12 seats that they hold and pick up 2 more. So to lose this seat would make it very, very difficult for the Democrats to make a close run thing in the Senate. Now let's look at the House of Representatives, one very interesting race in Kentucky. Now the Democrats have a much better chance of taking back the House of Representatives, but in the Kentucky 6th, Amy McGrath, interesting Democratic candidate. She was for 20 years a Marine fighter pilot, first time candidate. She's running against Andy Barr, who won the district by 22 points in 2014. Polling showed them neck and neck, but the 4% of the vote counted. Andy Barr has about 55% of the vote. Now, take these numbers with a grain of salt. They're very, very early counting, and in fact, in both Kentucky and Indiana, some districts in the state are in a different time zone than other districts in the state. So western districts have only just closed at the top of the hour. So we haven't even started counting votes from those districts. So very, very early days, but in two races that we're looking at as bellwethers in those two states, the Republicans are doing better than expected.
Wow, Laurie, it does seem like things are really up in the air there. And that was quite a gap that you mentioned earlier on, the 35%, I believe. That's quite a gap indeed. And so what are voters most concerned about?
And you're absolutely right. It was a massive gap between Joe Donnelly and Mike Braun. Mike Braun had the advantage of 4 presidential visits to the state of Indiana. It's also Mike Pence, the vice president's home state. But you ask a good question. What are voters concerned about? The feeling was that Republican voters were most concerned about immigration, Democrats more concerned about health care. But in 2 exit polls, one taken by AP, the other by CNN, voters of both stripes said that they were most concerned about health care. Now, in the CNN poll, 41% of voters at exit polls said that health care was their biggest concern. That's only 23% in the AP poll, but that 23% came on top of any other issue. The 3 big issues: health care, immigration, and then the economy. Now, the very interesting thing, with voters saying the economy is a concern, about 2/3 of voters told exit pollsters that they think the economy is in fantastic shape. About the same percentage of voters, 6 in 10, a little more than 6 in 10, also said that the country is on the wrong track. Now, it's very unusual for voters to say the economy's in great shape, but the country is on the wrong track. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there, and it's unusual for us to see that from polls. Usually when people believe the economy is good, they believe their country is on the right track. So this is a bit of a paradox.
That definitely seems bittersweet there for them. And of course, not surprised that immigration is a key issue there. Now, Donald Trump is not on the ballot per se, of course, but he cast a long shadow over this election. Can you sort of tell us about that?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump, when you think of this campaign, despite the fact Donald Trump's not on the ballot, as you mentioned, when you think of this campaign, you think about Donald Trump as leading the Republican Party. He was certainly the most visible character, the most visible campaigner of either party during these midterm elections. Now, a couple of interesting things that voters told pollsters when they were leaving the ballot boxes. 65% of voters said that they had made up their mind about who they were going to vote for more than a month ago. It means there weren't a whole lot of swing voters, and it also suggests that Donald Trump had a big influence on the way people voted. He's the most visible political figure in the U.S. by a very long way. About the same amount said that Donald Trump had an effect on their vote. Now, what we don't know is whether Donald Trump had a positive effect on their vote or a negative effect on their vote. But the man who wasn't on the ballot certainly seems to be the most influential politician in these midterm elections.
No doubt that Trump has definitely been influential. Of course, we've had other people like, Obama and Biden also campaigning. So I wonder if that will play a role as well. Now, we've been hearing stories of high turnout. I mean, of course, we've seen all the campaigns that have been urging people to go vote. What can you tell us about that?
We don't have turnout numbers for today yet, although there's so much anecdotal evidence that the turnout was very, very high on the actual voting day. I spoke to some relatives in Pennsylvania, in the Philadelphia suburbs. One said that they showed up at a very small local polling booth very early this morning and was given a number. The number was 169. He waited in line for over 2 hours just to get to the front door, something he had never seen before. Now, most U.S. states allow early voting. In fact, early voting can start for up to a month ahead of the actual voting day. In some states, every state has their own rule on early voting. It appears that early voting tallies, early voting results showed that 40% more people voted early than did in the same period in the 2014 election. So if early voting is any guide, turnout will be very, very high. Turnout in midterm elections doesn't tend to be very high. You'd have to go back to the 1960s before we've seen turnout even above 40% in a midterm election. And I think that's one thing, regardless of what you might think about Donald Trump, one thing that we have to thank him for. I think he deserves a lot of credit in bringing people to the polls. As we said a few moments ago, Donald Trump has been clearly the most visible figure in this campaign. And if Donald Trump's campaigning, his policies, his demeanor is something that brings more people out in a midterm election, that can only be good for American democracy.
And so now, just quickly before I let you go there, Laurie, what are next results to expect?
Well, we had 6 states where polls closed just a few moments ago at the top of the hour, including the key states of Florida, Indiana, and Georgia. Indiana, Florida, Virginia, and Georgia. And just before we started speaking, I saw an exit poll flash up on my screen showing that Bill Nelson, the incumbent senator of Florida, is only polling at about 45%. He's running against the ex-governor, Republican Rick Scott. So that would be another blow for the Democrats in trying to take control of the Senate. Although with that loss in Indiana, taking back control of the Senate will be extremely difficult for the Democrats.
All right, Laurie, thank you so much for all of that intel. And now, immigration, the economy, women's issues, partisanship, all weighed heavily on voters' minds as they cast ballots to decide control of Congress and put Trumpism to the test. Though not on the ballot, the president looms large over Decision Day among both supporters and detractors.
Just understand that there are different things that need to be taken care of on the local level, on the state level, on the federal level, and I don't think that he or his cronies, these loud, boisterous types of attitudes that they have, are working well for our country. And hopefully we'll have a change at the end of the day here. We'll have some people who will be in place who will make some changes for the better.
This is an extremely important time in American life, and we really all have to come together and vote for what we feel is most important in our democracy, to save our democracy.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. How? Why? Because he's not fair, he lies, and he's racist.
Well, I ended up voting for a lot of Republicans because I think they've got the best plan, and the economy's going extremely well now, and it's due, I think, to Republican leadership. Most of the candidates I favor are lining up behind Trump. And it's not because he's the world's greatest human being. It's because he's effective. He's getting things done. He's doing what he said he was going to do, which is very unusual.
I think President Trump has done terribly. I believe that we should have, as a country, we do need to have different perspectives that we can evaluate and talk about and argue about. But I don't believe that the leader of the country should be leading us down a path that alienates us internationally, that undermines some of the values that we hold dear, like people being equal, women's rights to control their own body. And so I feel like because of that, I don't feel he's leading as a proper president.
The reason why I'm out here voting today is because I'm doing like what Trump says, we're trying to make America great again. So I'm out here voting for the Republicans, and hopefully they can take control in our government and make America great again.
Well, time for a short break now, but do stay with us. There is plenty more still ahead, including more than 200 mass graves containing thousands of bodies have been found in areas of Iraq. We'll bring you the details shortly.
Nigeria. We are 198 million productive people with over 900,000 square kilometers of fertile land. Nigeria's banking system has emerged strong and resilient from the 2016 crisis, which has enhanced our productivity in agribusiness and manufacturing. Come, invest in Nigeria's agribusiness, manufacturing, and value-added mining. Enjoy the Central Bank of Nigeria-led initiatives in funding interventions, stabilized exchange rate, friendly capital repatriation regime, and many more. The Central Bank of Nigeria's robust monetary policy and interventions under President Buhari's administration and positioned the economy to target and attain a GDP growth of 6% with a strong and growing external reserves. Come, invest in Nigeria. Nigeria, ready for business.
As a fashion writer, I know how quickly trends are created and changed. In business, it's no different. To stay ahead, I needed a plan flexible enough to meet my changing communication needs. More Business 2.0 didn't just give me voice and data in one package. I got a whole lot more. With More Business, setting up my website was no problem. But I'm not just a fashion writer. I also own a home decor store before I decided to open an accessory store. With my customized More Business plan, managing my staff's communication is easy. No matter how frequently they come, oh, they go. With 9mobile's new online self-service this week, I could adapt my plans to include this.
From 2,000 Naira, choose a business bundle, customize your staff's voice and data lines, and enjoy a variety of add-on business services. Dial *200 *5# now to subscribe. More business.
Welcome back to Arise News Now, live from Nigeria's capital Abuja. I'm Folake Adesugba. Now, pipe bomb suspect Cesar Siok has been ordered to be held without bail in New York. Siok made his first court appearance in federal court in Manhattan following his transfer from Florida. He faces charges for allegedly mailing more than a dozen explosive devices to prominent Democrats, CNN, and critics of Republican President Donald Trump. Prosecutors say the most recent crude bomb was recovered on Friday in California, addressed to liberal activist Tom Steyer. Prosecutors told the judge that Siok presents a flight risk and is a serious danger to the public. Elsewhere, more than 200 mass graves containing thousands of bodies have been found in areas of Iraq that were once controlled by the Islamic State group, a UN investigation has found. The graves were found in the north and western governorates of Nineveh, Kirkuk, Salahuddin, and Anbar. They could contain as many as 12,000 victims, the UN report said. IS seized parts of Iraq in 2004 and imposed brutal rule, commonly killing anyone of whom it disapproved. It was eventually vanquished by a US-led air campaign backed by Iraqi government forces and allied militias on the ground, although pockets of IS activity remain in some areas.
100 mass graves containing the remains of thousands of victims have been discovered in areas formerly controlled by ISIL in Iraq, according to a UN report that we have released today. The report highlights the legacy of ISIL's relentless campaign of terror and violence and the victims' continued calls for truth and justice. While it is difficult to determine the total number of people in these graves, the smallest site in West Mosul contained 8 bodies, while the biggest is believed to be the Kasfa sinkhole south of Mosul, which may contain thousands. And meaningful truth and justice requires that these sites be appropriately preserved, excavated, and exhumated, and the identification of the remains of the many victims and their return to the families.
And an army search operation is underway in Cameroon to rescue dozens of people kidnapped from a boarding school. A government official said at least 79 students and 3 others were seized on Monday in Bamenda, the capital of the Northwest region. The government and English-speaking separatists have accused each other of orchestrating the kidnapping. Cameroon's northwest and southwest regions have been hit by secessionist rebellion in recent years. Regional Governor Adolphe Lele Lafrique de Ben Totofo blamed separatist militias for the kidnapping, but English-speaking separatists are accusing the government of staging the kidnapping as an attempt to discredit their cause. The authorities have declared a ban on vehicles driving between most districts of the northwest region.
Despite what happened here, the state government will not surrender. We are going to make sure the students, the people that were abducted, are brought back to the classrooms. Measures are being taken by the security men in that regard. They have provoked. There are raping, killing, looting, abducting, but they are going to face a strong, powerful reaction by the powers that be, not only here in Bamenda, but elsewhere in the north region.
Into the glasses are still there on the ground. Then in the dormitories, without fright, some of the students started packing their belongings. And in the boys' dormitory, 2 doors were actually broken. So they have taken students from Form 3, Form 4, Form 5, Lower C and Upper C.
All right, we're going to go back to Laurie in our London studios now because we have a couple of updates, I believe. All right, Laurie, now I'm hearing word that Andrew appears to be ahead. Can you give us an update on things?
Yeah, some big news out of Florida. And again, it is early days in this vote counting, but with about 15% of the vote counted in the state of Florida, Andrew Gillum, the Democratic challenger, has 52.5% of the vote. His Republican opponent, Ron DeSantis, 46.7, which is a pretty sizable lead at this point in the counting. Remember, Andrew Gillum vying to become the first African-American governor of Florida. He's also a man that Donald Trump referred to as a thief without providing any evidence. So he is out in the lead with a sizable lead at this point in the counting. And very quickly, I told you earlier that Bill Nelson vying to become the Democratic senator for Florida. I told you that he was behind in the counting. He has now pulled ahead of former Governor Rick Scott. Nelson with about 53% of the vote. That would make him a Democratic senator, help the Democrats to try and take over the Senate, although that's not looking very likely after the performance in Indiana. But Democrats looking very strong in the state of Florida. I'll keep an eye on it for you.
All right, well, thank you so much for that update, Laurie. All right, that's it for this edition of Arise News Now. Do stay with us on the channel. I'm Folake Adesugba from me and the entire team here in Abuja and London. Goodbye for now.